All right. There we go. All right. So where we left off, Tuesday was, I really started exploring this with you guys, right? And how we could use duplicate on faces to move stuff around, stuff like that, right? Now, keep in mind that one of the things about Outliner, because we do have this little outliner up here, and it's very much like Maya's outliner, right? A couple of you guys, like, Vlad, Ryan, Giovanni, Dante. You guys remember a little bit of outliner from Maya? Maya had his own version of this. It's just that Blender has it right out in the open, kind of like Modo does, right? Where it's right there, it's easy access. But remember, outliner is really just your whole entire scene right here, right? Now, one of the things I wanted to briefly show you guys, you don't have to do it, but I want to make sure you guys know it's there. There's these things called collections, right? Collections. What's cool about a collection is you can actually make multiple ones, right? So if I wanted to, I could just right-click in the outliner. So just right-click in the outliner, and I could do what's called new collection, right? And you'll notice it creates a collection right here called collection 2. Now, I could name this if I wanted to. Like, I could double-click on it, so it's just like a normal object, and I could say, like, camera / light, right? And then what I could do is I could actually left-click drag the camera into this collection and left-click drag the light into this collection. So you can actually create your own collections, right? So that way you don't have your light and your camera kind of all intersected between here. You can even color code all these, right? If I right-click on the camera light, you'll see that I can do new collection, I could duplicate collection, I could delete collection, but you can even give it a color if you wanted to, right? So it's kind of neat, right? Do you have to do this in Blender? No, right? But you can kind of do these collections, right? It's kind of neat, kind of like a group a little bit. So in this case, if you just want to kind of put your camera and your lights away, right, you can, right? So like I actually like to have my light on, but have the collection off, right? Or eyeball off, right? So kind of neat. Figured that'd be neat to see you guys if you wanted to organize it in a certain way, right? It's kind of one of those, you don't have to use this, but it's cool to know that if you right-click on the outliner, you could do new collection, you could drag and drop stuff into collections, and you can even color code them, right? You can even name them. Double-click on it. We call this car, right? There we go. So kind of neat to know. And this is kind of creating collections, putting stuff in collections isn't new, but the color coding is. That's actually they added that pretty recently. I want to say this version of Blender actually, but definitely the 2.9 series added the color coding. But if you right-click on a collection, you do get some options for it, right? So it's kind of cool. At some point, I did want to talk to you guys about you can make your own collections if you want to. It's really just kind of an organizational tool. You don't have to use it, but sometimes I find it annoying to see kind of the camera and light alphabetically in between the other objects. So I often just like to kind of put it in its own little thing, so that way my objects are just right here. Remember, you can select any object from here, right? And you could double-click on it, right? If you double-click, you can give it a name and call this Greats, or let's call it Greats for now, right? And of course, if you hit 4, you'll notice when you put your cursor in the viewport and you hit 4, you're in object mode. But remember, you can click on the objects in viewport also, right? And you see how it selects them in here. So Outliner is great because you can select stuff in here, and you could turn the eyeball off for them if you want to. But of course, you can select them in view as well, right? And you'll notice that some of these are off a little bit, right? Because when I was doing Control Duplicate, or Control D for duplicate, it was doing it based on the view because I was just clicking and dragging, and so some of these are off center a little bit. So remember, if you want to fix any of these, I can go. So the objects, right? I've got the object selected, and they're all. You'll notice they're all part of one object, right? And I know I've mentioned this before, but it never hurts to reiterate this stuff. Objects are kind of more nebulous as a concept than you think they are, right? They're really kind of almost a group. Not exactly, but an object is any polygons that are kind of in this one grouping that you've named. Those polygons don't have to touch, right? So it's better to think of an object as kind of like an invisible box that you can put a bunch of different polygons in, and those polygons could touch or not touch. So in this case, we've got them all together, right? And remember, that's one of the things you could do yourself. I haven't really talked about that much recently, but one of the things you could do is if you're in object mode and you right-click, you'll notice that there is, in this case I don't have multiple, so let me select multiple objects. If you if you have multiple objects selected and you right click, you'll see there's an option called join, right? Just like we have separate, right? Particularly when we're in face mode, we could separate. There is a join tool. This is Blender's version of combine. So just like Maya can combine stuff with combine tool, Blender can do it join. So one of the cool things about some of you guys, I know a lot of you guys have only used Blender, but some of you guys got some Maya time with me last year, if only one semester, because then the last semester we had to go Blender. You could see that at the end of the day, this stuff's all the same, right? If you go to 3D Studio Max, you go to Modo, you'll have similar functions there, right? So yeah, we're learning Blender, and we found that Blender's pretty great. But once you know these things, you can go to other software and you're just figuring out the interface. You're not having to learn how to rebuild stuff, right? You know how to model. You're just like, okay, what are the quick keys for navigation? Where is the equivalent to join or extrude, right? And usually it's called the same thing or something similar enough that you can figure it out. Oh, join. In this case, I don't want to join these. I want them separate, but you can, if you have multiple objects selected, if you right-click, it brings up the object context menu, there's join. In this case, I didn't want to do that, but I just figured something we could talk about. That way, if you had a bunch of separate grates and you wanted to make them one, just select multiple, right-click, join. So in this case, the grates are selected. I'm going to hit 3 for face mode. And what I want to do is I want to kind of line these up better with the center of the world, right? So I'm going to select the face, and then I'm going to select linked, right? Turn my move tool on also, W for move. So remember, select linked. The right bracket's the default quick key. I like spacebar. I use select linked a lot, and right bracket's kind of a dumb key all the way across my keyboard. Spacebar's closer. So as much as you have great workflow and quick keys for Blender, and so many of it took from Maya, occasionally some of its own defaults are like, why is that the select linked quick key, right? But the great thing is it's so easy to change those quick keys, right? Remember, if you just right-click, if there is no assigned, you can assign it, but you can also change it. So the nice thing is spacebar, when you think about it, if you're using select linked a lot, is actually a great, easier to get to than right bracket, right? So that's why I like spacebar. But remember, it is in the select menu, select linked. There is a default quick key for it, right bracket. And that just selects the connected polygons, right? So part of today is I'm just trying to talk to you guys a little more about objects and get you guys to have a deeper understanding. We've talked about them before. It's been in previous videos for earlier projects. But remember, these are all one object in the outliner, but the polygons themselves don't touch. That's what your select linked does, right? This is Blender's version of select connected, right? In Blender, in Maya, you just double click on a face and it's select connected, right? The reason Blender doesn't do that is because double-clicking on an edge in between two faces does the face loop selection, which when you get used to it, it's actually really awesome. So it does work a little bit differently to mine in that respect, but that's because they use double left-click for face edge loops, right? If you double-click on like that edge or close to it, it does the face loop really quickly and easily. So it's different, but it's awesome. So select linked. Remember, you can have polygons that don't touch but are part of one object. In this case, I've got my move tool on, W for move, and I've got it set to global, so it's set to the world orientation, right? It's perfectly aligned with the actual world axes, or X, Y, and Z that way. And of course, medium point's a good one because that's kind of the center, right? Remember, we have our snap tools right here, right? It's been a little while since we've seen snap. And of course, we'll use it a bit when we do some stuff with our rims later on as well. Blender has pretty good snapping tools. I do think Modos are still a little bit better, but Blenders are pretty darn good. Definitely, in many ways, I think better than Maya's. So we turn Magnet on, and Magnet turns the snapping functions on, but you see there's a little pull-down menu next to it, that little kind of V that points down. If you left-click on that, that's where all your options are. And the cool thing is, you see we do have vertex here, but we also have edge and face, volume, edge perpendicular, so you get some kind of neat stuff. Increment is your grid snap. And if you want it to snap to the absolute grid, you check this on. So you can have increment, and it kind of just, it's relative to the object. It'll snap by one grid unit, world grid unit, but it'll do it based on the object's, selection's position itself. Whereas absolute grid will snap it absolutely to the grid itself. And so now you see that one's already lined up pretty well. I'll select this one, select connected. And you see how that snaps it over perfectly. Select connected on that one. And you see how we can slowly, quickly align these up to be all kind of in the same position, snap to the center of the world. So if you ever need to fix that, and you're like, oh no, I wasn't really being careful. Remember, magnet turns your snapping tools on. And this very first one, increment, is basically your grid snap, right? And if you turn absolute grid snap on, it snaps it absolutely to the grid units. Whereas with that off, it'll still use the grid unit itself as the size of the snap, but it'll do it usually relative to the selection itself. So just remember, magnet, snapping tools, increment's usually the default one, but you have a lot of other good ones. Some of these we've seen before, right? We did a little bit of stuff with edge and vertex when we did our furniture on Project 2. Unfortunately, Dante didn't get to see that. But Blender actually has pretty nice snapping tools. Honestly, in my opinion, better than Maya's. But absolute grid snap gives you that kind of control for it. And this just will let you line these faces up better. And you see I was just using select linked, right, to kind of just adjust those. So that's kind of cool. Also, and now I can turn car body back on, right? Just click on that eyeball to turn car body back on. Now those are more properly lined up. Also remember, you don't have to use this, but you might like it, right? I know some of you guys still have just shaded mode on, regular shading. And there's nothing wrong with that, guys. It's a preference thing. I just want to remind you guys, right? So remember, this first one's wireframe, right? So you do have wireframe shaded. That's shaded. This will actually do full EV, right? Which when we do more with our lighting, rendering, texture, and we have a light on is really, really cool. But this second one's shaded. Remember, if you go to the little V next to it, Studio is kind of the default, right? But there is something called flat, which will make it like no shading at all, right? And there's something called Matcap. And Matcap gives you, in fact, they all do, these different options, right? So if you want a different kind of look to your default material, you can have that. Kind of cool, right? It's kind of neat. But I like Matcap because you can have red wax, you can have kind of that clayish look, you can have that. And you'll see that there's this one right here. You can even do kind of cherry red car. So this is actually something that some of you guys remember Mudbox having these features. Moto does for its sculpting. ZBrush does. ZBrush kind of invented them and everybody else stole them. But Matcaps are kind of neat. It's kind of an interesting way to kind of have some quick little material preferences. But you see how the car body catches the light and has some kind of nice clear coat reflection on it? And it just helps to show the form off a little bit better. So you can kind of get an idea of how light and reflectivity play with the surface you're working on, right? You don't have to use that, but I want to remind you guys, Matcap, and then you can pick which Matcap you want. And you can see there's some pretty crazy ones. Kind of depends on what you like, right? You can get really crazy if you want to. So I kind of like that one. Kind of gives me the car look without it being too tinted a color. So just remember you have Matcap. Figured that wouldn't be a bad thing to show again. So I did want to do a little bit more with these guys right here. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the face. Yeah, if you want to open that for me, that'd be great. So I'm going to hit spacebar, right? Because remember, that's my quick key for select connected, right? But remember, that's in the select menu. Select linked, right? Right brackets the default quick key for it, but spacebar is what I set for because I just think it's something I use a lot and it's better. So remember, we can copy these some more, right? So I can just take Control D, right? Because remember, that's in mesh menu, right? And you'll see there's duplicate, right? So mesh, duplicate, Control D is the quick key. So I'm going to hit Control D. Now I can just click right in the viewport, and that will actually create that duplicate, right? So if you don't want to just free move it everywhere, which you can, right? When you left click drag with once you hit Control D, if you left click drag, it'll move it. And that can actually be really cool, but sometimes you just want to have it be in the same place. So sometimes you just click, left click. You don't left click drag, you just left click. And then with my move tool on, you know, W for move, I can move it up just along the blue. Or it could be the red, because that'll constrain along 2 axes, right? And then, of course, I can hit R for scale. Scale that in a little bit on the red. remember, you do have an X-ray shade in Blender, right? It's right there. X-ray, toggle, but there's a quick key for it, Alt-X. So you can quickly just toggle it off and on just to kind of see really quick. Okay, I'm going to go down and grab this polygon, select linked, right? Right bracket's the quick key for it, but I said it's spacebar. Select linked. Control D, left click just to create it. W for move. Move it down on the blue arrow. Maybe back just a little bit on the green. There we go. Kind of depends on how we want it to be. And that looks like that'll fit pretty well. And now we've got much more of kind of a complete grid. Of course, if I want to, I could go and I could select a face on each one of these and select linked and move the whole thing down a little bit, right? So now we've got a grate. And it just gave us some great practice with our duplicate function again, right? Remember, we've seen this a bit for some of our modeling on our room. We definitely saw it for some of our character, our crab stuff that we did. But you do have, in the mesh menu, a duplicate polygon feature, right? Control D. And it just takes whatever polygons you've selected and duplicates them. Now, if we wanted to still modify this at all, like maybe I want these grates to be longer. Remember, I can grab just these end faces. Remember, Shift adds to selection, right? I'll even grab that one just to be safe. And then, of course, W for move. But we can go up to the global button here. Because remember, this is your transform orientation. And we could switch it to normal. And you notice how normal sets it to kind of have this manipulator oriented to the direction the face is pointing. Remember, that's normal direction, right? We're going to soon have kind of that quick key again, right? Normal direction. So just normal, like the word normal. But it's basically what it's saying is that whichever direction your polygon points, it faces. That's its normal direction. And that's how normal maps are baked, right? Remember, we've done a little bit of normal map baking stuff. It's taking the normal directions of those hundreds, thousands, or millions of polygons, and it's turning them into colored pixels to create a really sophisticated bump map, right? For video games and things like that. We saw that's how we got some of our detail on our models to be built for video games. But also, your orientation can be set to normal direction, right? You see, it's align the transformation axis to the average normal of selected elements, right? So we can just grab this blue arrow, and you see how if I wanted to make them all shorter, I can. If I want to make them all longer, I can, right? But it's kind of doing it along that exact direction, right? If we just have this set to global, right, they'd all kind of move down along that blue. You see how it just doesn't create the same kind of effect? So remember, you can reorient your manipulators for certain kind of modeling you might want to do. Of course, I could hit select linked, and I could also just hit R for scale. And right now it's set to median point, right? So if I scale these all in, you see how I can make all of them together smaller. But if I wanted to make each separate kind of grate or panel smaller individually of the rest, remember you go to this one right here, right? It's kind of what looks like a link, like a kind of a chain link, right? And you'll see that you can go to individual origins instead of median point. Median point's kind of like center. Individual origin, and then you'll see that each one scales uniformly individually, right? And of course, you can have this and these on different things, so you can combine them in different ways. This is an area that Blender is pretty much about as good as Modo is. It's actually quite good. Maya's not bad at it, but I definitely wish some of the functionality for Maya was here. I just prefer the way Modo and Blender do this a lot more. So some pretty neat little different options for orientation controls, right? If you really, really wanted to also, remember, usually whatever you've kind of selected first, or sometimes last if you're doing like drag select or something like that, is your active element. You notice how kind of there's always one that's kind of highlighted a little bit more than the rest? That's actually what your active element is, right? And so if I have active element on plus normal, you'll notice that I can actually scale this guy down from there. And then I can click on this one, select linked, and you see how it automatically goes to kind of active element. So that'll be your kind of position. and then it's set to normal direction. And so you see how I can kind of keep going in here and just kind of doing some neat stuff with this. Oh, come on, grab the blue one. What are you doing? Should eventually, yeah, what's going on there? Oh, I didn't do select link, my bad. So, really, really cool, right? So active element is in its own right really, really cool, because it's kind of like whatever your first thing selected was, particularly when you do select linked, that'll be the active element, and so it'll kind of orient to that as the position of your manipulator. And you can combine it with normal, right? So I'm going to do, because I liked it the way it was, but I'm trying to show you guys some of the cool functionality that you can have here for making adjustments, right? It's one of the things I wanted to really make sure you guys got to see a little bit more of. To finish off today, we're not quite done with everything yet, but I did want to start to show you guys how you can start to, say, break your door off, right? You might not be ready for this yet, and we'll keep breaking more of the carp as we go along, but I figured we'll finish that off today. So I'm going to go to 4 for object mode, click on the car body, 3 for face mode. Now, I can, of course, select faces and then grow out selection if I want to, right? So I can just go to circle select, kind of select a few. Up arrow grows, right? Remember in the select menu, you do have select more or less. Up arrow down arrow, that's your grow and shrink. But there is another function you have in here. If I go to 2 for edge mode, I could double click, right? Double left click on this edge to select an edge loop. Shift double left click to select that edge loop. And then I could shift double click to select that edge loop. There is a tool in Blender, if you go to select loops, called select inner region. So you see on the select loops menu, you have edge loops, that's just double left click. Alt double left click is rings. But there is something called select loop inner region. And you see how it actually selects the faces in between those 2 edge loops? Maya does not have that. Moto has that. Maya does not have that. And this actually can work for arms, legs. We kind of saw it a little bit when we did our crab legs, right? So select inner loop region is actually great for selecting an arm, a finger, a leg. Because if you select just an edge loop on the leg or a finger or an arm, it'll select the side that has less polygons. But also, if you have 2 edge loops that create kind of a region, it'll select the lesser amount of polygons in between those 2 loop regions. That's a really cool tool, isn't it? Love this. It's one of those things I loved in Moto for a long time, and then I found out Blender had it, and I was like, yay! Right? So there is actually select loop inner region, which is kind of basically, hey, give me an edge loop or multiple edge loops, and I'll select the lesser amount of polygons in between them. So an easy way to select the door. Now, if we want to separate this door off, we have a couple of options. One, if we right click, we'll see that we do have the ability to do, one, we could split it at the edges if we wanted to, right? I might want to make this a separate object, though, temporarily. So it is one of those things where keep in mind that you can do things like separate this off into its own object. You can even do edge split, although you notice how that kind of grabs all of them, right? So it might even be one of those things where if I just select these edge loops, I can right click and just do edge split, and you see how that unwelds those from the rest of it. So now we have a separate door. It's still part of the same object, but it is separate. But of course, if we use that select loops, loop inner region, and I go to 3 for face mode, right? And you notice how it's good at converting? So I just go to 3 and it takes that selection that's already converted. I can do right click and you'll see that there's separate selection. And you see how that truly separates the object out? And now that is its own fully separate object. So I just wanted to kind of point out a few ways that you could just select the edge loops and just do edge split. That way if you want to kind of unweld those edge loops so the door is separate polygons but still part of the original object, you can do that. But also, if you have all of the faces selected, there is separate selection, and that actually will truly separate this into a separate object. All right. We can always rejoin that. We can always merge those back together, so it's not like we can't fix it if we want to later on. But that'll be, I think, a great place to stop. We went a little bit longer today just because, we kind of had a weird day yesterday. So let's start to get you guys to that point where you see you can kind of start separating things out. You guys might not be ready for that on the door. It's okay. We'll kind of do some thickening options on this later on as well. But I figured it'd be a great place to start to kind of show you guys how you can separate this single body into the multiple parts.